بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم الحمد لله نحمده ونستعينه ونستغفره ونعوذ بالله من شرور أنفسنا ومن سيئات أعمالنا من يهده الله فلا مضل له ومن يضلل فلا هادي له وأشهد أن لا إله إلا الله وحده لا شريك له وأشهد أن محمدا عبده ورسوله أما بعد فإن أحسن الكلام كلام الله وخير الهدى هدى محمد صلى الله عليه وسلم وإن شر الأمور محدثاتها وكل محدثة بدعة وكل بدعة ضلالة وكل ضلالة في النار. So today is our 17th lesson. That's lesson number 17 on the book Taqreeb Tadmuriyyah. And the last time that we met, we were discussing the third category, the third group from the groups who have deviated on the issue of Allah's names and His attributes. And this group, the Ghulatul Jahmiyyah wal Qaramita wal Batiniyyah. So these are basically the Jahmiyyah and the Qaramita and Batiniyyah. These are names of other sects which appeared later. But basically the view of this group is that they describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala only with negations. Only with negations. And we went through some of their arguments. The arguments are very similar to what has preceded, that if we affirm anything positive for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it means we have automatically likened Him to the creatures, to created beings. So if we say Allah is knowing and hearing and seeing, then the only way we know and understand knowing and hearing and seeing is on the basis of what we see and experience in the creation. So Allah must be like that. Right? So this is the basic shubha, or the basic argument that they use. And so in the previous lesson, we went through 5 or so counter arguments to show that this reasoning is false. And most of these counter arguments you should already be able to deduce and understand. So most of these counter arguments we should be able to deduce quite easily on the basis of what we established in the important foundational principles at the beginning part of this series. And so you will see that many of the counter arguments are basically repetitions of what we said against the Mu'tazila or against the Ash'aris and Maturidis. Right? So there's a lot of repetition. So in any case, this argument, just to summarize what we went through, first of all, against this view. So this view is what? We describe Allah only with negatives. Right? So we say, in their view, Allah is not ignorant, Allah is not blind, Allah is not deaf, Allah is not unjust. And so you just use a series of negations to describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So this position or this viewpoint, the response to it is, first of all, this opposes what we find in the Quran, because in the Quran, Allah Azza wa Jal, He has combined between affirmation and negation. So we see very clearly in the Quran, from many of the examples that we've seen before, that Allah affirms names for Himself, affirms attributes for Himself, and He negates some things, in a general broad sense, or specific things, if there's a reason to do so. Like negating a son from Himself, or negating that He becomes tired, or negating that He does injustice. Right? So this is what we find in the Quran. So it's as if these people are believing in part of the book and disbelieving another part of the book. It's as if they are saying that we will believe when Allah says, Laysa kamithlihi shay. We will believe that because it's a negation. But we will disbelieve when Allah says, وَهُوَ السَّمِيعُ الْبَصِيرُ, that He is all hearing, all seeing. Right? This is essentially what they are really saying. So this is the first counter argument that we looked at in the previous lesson. The second counter argument is that this type of description or non-description you are trying to give for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, it's something that exists in the mind only. Right? Because the idea that something does not have a single attribute, this is something that can be conceived in the mind only. It doesn't exist outside of the mind. Because in actual reality, there's no such thing that exists except that it must have at least one attribute. Right? Otherwise, it's a notion in the mind only. That's the second point. The third point is that one of the other arguments that they used was that they said that the mawsuf and the sifa are one and the same thing, right? Which means that basically the thing being described and the description are one and the same thing, right? So for example, we don't say, according to them, Allah with his knowledge, Allah with his hearing, Allah with his seeing. Rather they say the hearing is Allah. Allah and hearing are one and the same thing. Allah and the seeing are one and the same thing. Allah and his knowledge are one and the same thing, right? So this is one of their attempts to try to negate the names or the attributes by making them synonymous with Allah. And the second part of this, or the second branch of this, is that they say that all these other attributes, Allah's knowledge, hearing, seeing, they are not different to each other. They are all one and the same thing. But they just have different labels. But it's all really one and the same thing. Right? So all the attributes are one and the same thing. And the attributes are the same thing as Allah himself. And so therefore there is just Allah. Right? This is a basic idea. And the Shaykh says that this sophistry, this is pure sophistry. Right? This is purely just rejecting elementary foundations, elementary principles in reason, and it's arrogance as well. Because we know that every attribute given to a thing is other than another attribute, right? So, if something is hot, that hotness is other than it being fluid. Something is hot and it's fluid. Well, the being hot is something other than it being fluid, right? This is something that we know just from actual experience and interaction with the world, right? So these are elementary principles, and these people are basically violating elementary basic principles to reject what is obvious. So similarly, when we say about a man that he's tall and he's generous and he is, fast and he is, whatever other attributes, we know that all of these attributes are other than the other attribute, right? So being tall is other than being just or being kind. This is basic common sense. So anyhow, this was the third response, that you are violating basic reason, basic common sense, basic things that we experience and we know about physical reality from just basic interaction. And everybody knows this, right? From the child to the elderly to the one who's a simple man to the one who's a sophisticated man. Everybody knows this. Even old barren women, they know all of this, right? This is not a matter of like intelligence or anything. This is just basic common sense. The fourth point that we mentioned from what the Sheikh said is that we also know that to describe Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala with positive attributes is greater in praise and is greater in worth than describing him with negatives, right? So, in other words, that's to say that when we say Allah is all hearing, all seeing, all knowing, all wise, all just, all powerful, and when we hear these words, we feel that there's praise and veneration for the being that is being given these names. But when we say, for example, he's not blind, he's not deaf, he's not ignorant, he's not unjust, he's not incapable, he's not this, he's not that, and we're using these negatives, we don't really perceive or feel that this now is somehow, praise or veneration, right? And even the Sheikh gave examples in the previous lesson as well, that if we were to describe a king, if someone was to stand in front of a king and was to say to the king that you are wise, you are just, you are powerful, you are generous, you are astute, in your politics or whatever it might be, and a man mentions all of these positives, right? We clearly understand that this is praise. But if we were to, but if he was to stand in front of him and say, you are not deaf, you are not a beggar, you are not, this, that, and the other, whatever, the king would feel as if he's being mocked. Like this is mockery. You are standing here, making all these negations. There's nothing. You are mocking me. All right, this would be mockery. So the fourth point really is that it's only with affirmation do we have actual praise and veneration and glorification and the likes. And whereas these people, the only things they speak of is negation. So that is really a belittlement of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. The fifth point that we mentioned in the previous lesson is that the argument was that if you affirm multiple attributes, if you say Allah is hearing, seeing, knowing, wise, merciful, generous, and so on and so forth, this necessitates a multiplicity of gods. And so this is an argument similar to the Mu'tazila. This, again, we know from just pure common sense and experience, this is false, because we can take anything like a coin, for example. It's one coin, and we can say this coin is it's copper, or it's gold, or it's silver, and it's round, and it is shiny, and it's we can say all of these things. These are all different attributes, but this does not mean now that we now have 3 or 4 coexisting things which are all other than each other. This is not true. This is false. There is one entity, and one entity can have multiple attributes. Just like we have a man, can be a father, can be a brother, can be a son, and he can also be let's say a tailor who makes clothes, and he's also generous, and he's also truthful. We still have one man. There's only one man, right? So what these people do is they take words in the Arabic language which have a clear meaning in the Arabic language. For example, wahid and ahad. Wahid means one, ahad means one, right? And what they do is they take philosophical concepts and philosophical ideas, and they put those ideas into these terms, so that when you speak to them, and they're speaking to you, you may not really understand what they mean, because to you, when you read the Quran, and you read in the Quran, wahid and ahad, it means one entity, one man, right? Or one creator, who has attributes, who has names, but he's still one. Whereas what they are doing is they are taking philosophical concepts, and they will say, well, okay, something which is composed of many parts or atoms or can't really be one, right? So you can't say a coin is one coin because it's so they're really coming from with these philosophical ideas where they are polluting the meaning of words in the clear Arabic language and the way these words are used in the Quran and the Sunnah. So what they mean by this really is to say, if you say Allah has knowledge, power, will, wisdom, then you've just affirmed 4 separate beings, 4 separate entities. And this is false, because as we said in the previous lesson, what's happening here is it's the mind which is making the distinctions in terms of the meanings, whereas in physical reality, outside of the mind, that person you are describing is still only one entity, right? So I can say, for example, there's Abdullah, and Abdullah is generous, kind, tall, merciful. These are distinctions of meanings I'm making in my mind. This is in my mind that this is happening, right? I'm separating all the meanings. But outside of my mind, Abdullah is still one entity, is still one being, right? So basically, this argument here is totally false, what they're trying to use. So these were the 5 points that we discussed in the previous lesson. We have 2 more very quickly to finish off. And really, these 2 points, number 6 is, they say that if you affirm for Allah any names, it means you are attributing to Allah the meaning of the name, the ma'na, the meaning of the name, right? Which then would necessitate that you are likening Allah to His creation. Really, this is like a repeat of what we've heard before. What they mean by this is, if we say Allah is as-Sami', Allah is the all-hearing, it means we've ascribed hearing to Allah, which is true, because this is plain and obvious in the language. When we say someone is Hakim, he's wise, well, it means that he has the attribute of wisdom, or the meaning, the ma'na, the meaning of wisdom is established with him. That's what we're clearly saying. And so this is clearly true, that if you affirm a name for something, you are attributing the ma'na, the meaning. Well, this is obvious. Of course this is true. Yes, this is what we are doing. But then they say this necessitates tashbih. This now necessitates resembling Allah to His creation. And again, this goes back to the principle that we mentioned, which is that ishtirak or al-musharaka, which is to share in the name or the label, does not mean that the realities are the same. Right? Just because 2 things have the same name does not mean that the realities are the same. Right? And so they are violating this principle that we mentioned previously. And this would be the response to them. Right? The response would be that just because 2 things share in the name or a meaning does not mean that the realities are the same. And we gave many examples previously in the earlier lessons. We said we have a jinn or an angel and a man, and a jinn can have attributes such as hearing and seeing and speech, but the reality of those attributes are unlike our attributes, right? We've never seen the function or the working or to see actually and physically, how does a jinn see? Because a jinn is made of, something that we can't see. It's not like flesh that we are from dust and flesh. And so how does a jinn see then? Or touch or whatever it might be? Well, we don't know. But just because we say a man hears and a jinn hears and a man speaks and a jinn speaks and a man has knowledge and a jinn has knowledge or holds knowledge, does not mean that the realities in each of those cases, in each of those attributes, are the same. They clearly are not. They clearly are not. Right? So, sharing in the name does not mean similarity in the reality behind it. This is a refutation of this one. And finally, the 7th, which again is just a rehash or a repetition, which is that they say, if you employ affirmation, if you speak with Allah with positive attributes, He has this attribute, that attribute, then again, you have resembled Him to the existing things, to the things which are present. Right? So if we say Allah is knowing and hearing and seeing and wise, then we've likened Him to the things which are present, about which we can say, like a man, for example, he's knowing, he's seeing. Again, same answer that we gave previously, that this is not necessitated because of that principle that we just mentioned. Sharing in the name does not mean having the same reality. So really, after all of these 7 arguments are refuted, or the 7 points are presented in refutation of their general position, then they only have one of 2 choices, which is either you affirm for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala everything, or you negate from Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala everything. You negate. And if you negate from Him, then really what you are doing is you are resembling Allah to the non-existing things. Right? So either way, you have to take the middle path and agree with the people of the Sunnah. Anyhow, this concludes the third group, right? So remember we said that we started with the Ash'aris, then we went to the Mu'tazila, and as we go to each group, we find that they are negating more and more, right? So here, the third group, from the four groups in the table that you have, right? The third group, the Jahmiyyah, they negate all names, attributes, actions for Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. And as you can see, this view, even though it is false, it is more coherent, it is more consistent, right? It is internally coherent. Because if you say that we don't want to liken Allah to His creation in any way, then you have to say, well, Allah, we can't ascribe a name to Him, we can't ascribe an attribute to Him, we can't ascribe a description to Him or an attribute to Him, we can't ascribe an action to Him, we can't say anything positive, any positive attribute about Him, because automatically we have likened Him to the creation, right? So these people here, the Jahmiyyah, they are being consistent. They are implementing the principle consistently. Whereas the two previous groups that we looked at, the Mu'tazila, they say, we'll affirm the names but not the attributes. This is a gross contradiction. There's so many problems. You say that Allah is merciful, the merciful, Ar-Rahim, but He doesn't have any mercy. How can you actually say that? We'll affirm the name but not the attribute, because the name is given because of the attribute. So how can you negate the attribute and affirm the name at the same time? This is a gross contradiction. And likewise, the Ash'aris and Maturidis, they say we'll affirm 7 attributes, but we can't affirm the rest. All right? So they have no uniform, consistent principle. They fall into wild contradiction. Whereas here we can see these people are being, coherent. They are sticking to the principle and being consistent in that. So anyhow, this is the third group. We're now going to move to the fourth group. And these are the people who, as you'll see, their statement is a falsehood. So the Shaykh says here, At-Ta'ifatul Rabi'ah, the fourth group, Ghulatul Ghulat. Right? So here he's now saying, the extremists among the extremists. Right? So those that we just looked at, they are the extremists. Because they say, we will only describe Allah in terms of negatives. Right? This is like an extreme view. These people here now are, as the Shaykh says, Ghulatul Ghulat. They are the extremists among the extremists. From the Jahmiyyah, min al-falasifa, wal-Jahmiyyah, wal-Qaramita, wal-Batiniyyah, wa-ghayrihim. Right? These are the extremists among the extremists from the groups of like the philosophers and the Jahmiyyah and the Qaramita and Batiniyyah. Right? So these are kind of like, deviant kind of sects that came afterwards, the esoteric kind of groups that believe in mysticism and hidden knowledge, occult knowledge, things like that. So the Shaykh says, وَطَرِيقَتُهُمْ أَنَّهُمْ أَنْكَرُوا فِي حَقِّ اللَّهِ تَعَالَى الْإِثْبَاتِ وَالنَّفِي فنفوا عنه الوجود والعدم والحياة والموت والعلم والجهل ونحوها وقالوا إنه لا موجود ولا معدوم ولا حي ولا ميت ولا عالم ولا جاهل ونحو ذلك. وشبهتهم أنهم اعتقدوا أنهم إن وصفوه بالإثبات شبهوه بالموجودات وإن وصفوه بالنفي شبهوه بالمعدومات. Right. So here, the Shaykh is saying that the way and the path of this group, this group, what they say is that regarding Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, they say that we are not going to describe him with any attributes, nor are we going to negate from him any attributes. Right? So these are saying we reject both affirmation and negation. Whereas remember the previous group, what did they say? They say, yeah, we're not going to describe him with any affirmation. We're describing him only with negations. Now this group here is negating even the negations. Right? So we don't describe him with the negations either. So, in other words, what are they really saying? They are saying, we do not say Allah exists, nor do we say Allah does not exist. Do you understand? Right? But these are two opposites. Existence and non-existence are two opposites. So their position is, no, we're not going to do this, no, we're going to do that, because this would, well, the reason will come later. Right? So they negate from Allah al-wujud wal-adam. That Allah exists and that Allah does not exist. We negate both of these. We don't say any of these. We don't say Allah exists, nor do we say Allah does not exist. Likewise, al-hayat wal-maut. Life and death. Life and death. Right? We don't say Allah has life, Allah is living, nor do we say Allah is dead or does not, is unliving, or has maut, death. Nor do we say wala alim wala jahil. Nor do we say Allah has knowledge. Nor do we say Allah is ignorant. Right? So the Shaykh goes on to say that their shubha, their misconception, why do they say this? Why are they saying this? What's the shubha? Is that they believe that if they were to describe Allah with something positive, they would liken him to the existing things, to the things which are mawjood, which are actually present. And if they described him with negatives, then they would be resembling him to the non-existing things. Do you understand what the argument here is? The argument is here that if we say Allah is hearing, then we've likened him to creatures in his creation who hear. And if we say Allah is not deaf, then the only things about which it can be said not deaf is the thing that doesn't exist. So now we have likened Allah to non-existing things. So therefore we can neither make affirmation nor can we make negation. And we have to now flee from everything and not say anything. Right? So this is the view of these people, and as you can see, it is extremism to the level where you now start, like you've lost a grip on reality itself. Right? You've lost a grip on reality itself. So the answer to these people, then, there are a number of responses to this argument, or to this position. And the first point is to say that, to give Allah names that Allah gave himself and to describe him with what he described himself is not tashbih, is not resemblance, nor does it necessitate resemblance. And going back to the same principle, sharing in the name or the attribute does not necessitate similarity in the actual realities. Right? And the fact that you people call this tashbih is nothing more than a means of deceiving the common people and deceiving the ignorant people. Right? This is just a ruse that you give a label to something, and it's a bit like, we see this often with the non-Muslims. You speak the truth and they'll call it a hate crime. This is a hate crime. Right? You say that, a man is a man and a woman is a woman, and, there are only biological males and biological females, and then you speak the truth, what's actually physically true. And they'll describe this as, this is discrimination and a hate crime, right? It's just making fools of the ignorant people and right? They're trying to give labels to something that's actually true in order to confound and confuse the truth, right? And so these people are doing the same thing. We say Allah Azza wa Jal is hearing and seeing and knowing, all-wise, merciful, all-powerful. And this is astaghfirullah, this is shirk. This is tashbih, this is tamthil. Now, just because you give it that label doesn't mean that it actually is, right? So going back to the same principle again, this is why it's very important to understand the basic principles that sharing in the name or the label does not mean similarity in the actual realities. Many of these positions are destroyed by this principle, right? So the Shaykh goes on, they didn't say this except out of tamweeh and talbis, to deceive and confuse the common people. And, if we were to accept the likes of this false argument or this claim, then every person would be able to describe something true with a label which is false. Everybody would be able to do that then. If we were to allow this to happen, then everybody could come along and, change the realities that we observe and experience just by giving them different names and labels. This is actually what the kuffar they do, the people of disbelief, and the way they use language to confound and to confuse the truth. Anyhow, this is the first point. The first point: this is not tashbih, this is not resemblance, this is not likening Allah to His creation, because sharing in the name or label does not mean sharing in the realities. The second point is that to illustrate the difference, let's take the issue of existence, right? Wujud and its opposite, adam. Let's take this attribute, right? So we know that Allah exists, and we know that the creation exists. Yes? Clearly, right? Does this mean now that we have likened Allah's existence to the existence of His creation just because we say Allah exists and the creation exists? No, it hasn't. So the Shaykh goes on to explain. He says that أنه قد علم بضرورة العقل والحس أن الموجود الممكن لا بد له من موجد واجب الوجود. So he says we know by necessity of reason, and by observation of the senses, that a thing which comes to be, which is possible, it's possible for it to exist, and then it comes to be, right? Like we see many things. A baby is born which wasn't there 9 months before, right? It's possible for it to be born, and then it comes to be. Right, this is something which is mumkin and hadith, right? It's possible and it's originated, right? That all such things which are like this, by necessity they must have a mujid. A mujid is one who brings it into existence, right? By necessity we know this from reason and experience, right? This table didn't just come here. The table didn't just come here. The table has a mujid. We know there is someone who took the basic elements and put it together, and that's how it is here, right? So we know this by necessity. And likewise, the creation as a whole, and this creation and all the function therein, we know that by necessity it has a maker who is eternally present, right? His presence and His existence is eternal, and it is absolutely necessary, right? It has to be. It's absolutely necessary. So, and this is because we know it is impossible for something which is originated to come to be without an originator. That is impossible. Whatever is originated must have an originator. So we know this. And once we know this, that Allah exists and we exist, or the creation exists, then we know that the existence for Allah is different to the existence for His creation. What are the differences? Right? What are the differences? Well, first of all, one of these existences, which is the existence of Allah, is eternal. Right? It is without beginning, it is without end. And Allah Azza wa Jal has always been present. The other existence, which is the existence of the creation, then it is something that, it depends upon other than itself. It requires a creator, and it had a beginning, and it will have an end, right? So it is not without beginning, and it is not without end. So therefore, the existence of the creation is unlike the existence of the creator, right? This is from this angle that it isn't eternal. So the existence cannot be the same. So just on this one example, the example of wujud, we said Allah exists and the creation exists. Does it necessitate now that we have likened Allah, the creator, to His creation? Of course we haven't, because the reality of Allah's existence is different to our existence. His existence is eternal, without beginning, without end. Our existence it's originated, it's temporal. It was without it was with a beginning. Right? It's not without a beginning, it is with a beginning, and it is with an end. Right? So therefore, we can see from this very clearly that we know that there are differences between these two existences, and therefore the realities cannot be the same. So therefore, when they say this argument they use, that if you affirm for Allah affirmations, you've likened Him to the creation, we know this is false. Just by giving this one example of existence, right? Now we could give the same for the other attributes, power, knowledge, right? And we've done this in previous lessons. The third point in refutation of these people is that if you reject both affirmation and negation at the same time, then it means you are basically negating two contradictory things at the same time. And this is impossible. Right? Like, to give an example, you can't say, we don't say Allah exists, nor do we say Allah does not exist. This is denying two opposites at the same time, which you can't do, which are contradictory. You can't do that. Right? So, like, you can't say, we don't say this is true, nor do we say this is false. Well, it's either true or it's false. Like, if I say I'm sat in this room, is this true or false? You can't say, well, we're not going to say it's true. No, we're going to say it's not true. Well, you can't have it both ways. One of them is true. Either I am here in this room or I'm not in this room. Right? So when they say we will not ascribe Allah with any positive attributes, nor will we negate from Him any negations, right? So we won't say Allah is living, but we won't say either that He's not living. This is a contradiction, because either Allah is living or He's not living. You can't have two things at the same time, right? So really what they're doing here is falling into a vile contradiction, and one of the two has to exist. Otherwise, what they are really doing, see, now it gets worse and worse, right? what they are really doing is, see, what they tried to do, okay, let's go back to the third group, right? The third group, the Jahmiyyah. They say, we're not going to describe Allah with any positive attributes, right? We will only describe Him with negations. So what they've tried to do is they've tried to flee from likening Allah to existing things, and they've ended up likening Allah to non-existing things. Why? Because they're describing Allah with negatives, right? Not ignorant, not dead, not hearing, not seeing. These are negations that you make which can be made of non-existent things. So you fled from trying to liken Allah to existing things, and you've ended up likening Him to non-existing things. Right. This group, the fourth group here, they are saying we're not going to describe Allah with the positive attributes, nor with negative attributes. Right? So they've tried to flee from that, and what have they fallen into? Something even worse, which is likening Allah to the impossible things. Do you understand? Right? So if you say, we don't say Allah is living, nor do we say Allah is dead. We don't say Allah is knowing, nor do we say Allah is ignorant. We don't say Allah exists, nor do we say He does not exist. These are impossible things. These are impossibilities. So you've tried to flee from likening Allah with the existing things and the non-existing things, because you said we're not going to describe Him with a positive attribute or a negative attribute. And what you've ended up doing is actually likening Allah with the impossible things. Right? Because something being dead and alive at the same time is an impossible thing. And something not existing and existing at the same time is an impossible thing. So you are describing Allah in a way, or you are likening Allah to the impossible things, right? And that's even worse. It's even worse because impossible things cannot ever exist. So the Shaykh makes this point. This is the third argument against them. But then they say they might come back and they might have a counter argument. They will come back and they will say, well, hold on a minute. This can only be true if the thing being described can actually accept the two opposites, right? But there are many things to which these attributes don't apply. So what they're basically saying is, hold on, no. Take a wall, for example. You don't say about the wall, is it living, is it dead? Is it knowledgeable, is it ignorant? This doesn't apply to the wall, right? So what we are saying is not from the impossible things, and what we are saying is correct, right? That we negate both affirmation and negation from Allah. This does not then make it from the impossible things, right? So this is their like counter argument and counter response, and they said, look, we can negate both opposites from a wall. We can say the wall is neither hearing nor deaf, and we can say it is neither ignorant nor knowledgeable, and we can say it is neither living nor dead. So there's no contradiction here, right? There's no contradiction and there's no impossibility. So the Shaykh says there are four responses to this claim of theirs. The first response is that this does not apply to them saying, them negating Allah's existence and Allah's non-existence. You can't apply this principle to that, right? Because this issue of wujud and adam, something exists or it doesn't exist, that is a total opposite. Like you can't say, look, the wall exists and doesn't exist. I haven't contradicted myself, right? You can't include the pair of existence and non-existence in this counter argument. It doesn't apply. And you are the ones who are saying, we're not going to say Allah exists, nor we're going to say Allah does not exist. You are the ones who are saying that, right? So this clearly does not apply. This is a gross contradiction, right? It's either one or the other. Either something exists or it does not exist, right? You can't say that. That's the first point. The second point is even their argument when they say, for example, something inanimate, something which doesn't have life, that, we can't say about it that it has life or does not have life, or that it is blind, or that it is seeing, or that it is hearing, or that it is deaf. Because this is just really, this is just terminology. It doesn't change the actual realities. Because we know in the Quran, from the Quran, that, say for example, the staff of Moses, alayhi salam, the staff of Moses, right? This is made of wood or whatever it might be, and Allah Azza wa Jal, He brought it to life. He brought it to life, right? So their argument is not true that inanimate things, that we shouldn't say about inanimate things that they are neither living nor dead. This actually is not true, because we know from what Allah has told us in Revelation, and we also know there are many other things that will happen in the future, that inanimate things, Allah has put within those things, from His power, He can make those things come to life. He can give dead, inanimate things life, right? So this is one example. Another example is, he says here a verse regarding the idols. وَالَّذِينَ يَدْعُونَ مِن دُونِ اللَّهِ لَا يَخْلُقُونَ شَيْئًا وَهُمْ يُخْلَقُونَ أَمْوَاتٌ غَيْرُ أَحْيَاءٍ. Those whom they invoke besides Allah do not create anything. They themselves are created. They are dead, not living. وَمَا يَشْعُرُونَ أَيَّانَ يُبْعَثُونَ. And they do not know when they will be brought back to life or resurrected. Right? So, upon the view that this is referring to actual idols, because it can also refer to, people as well, but upon the view that refers to idols, here Allah has said that these idols are dead, not living. Right? So, by textual proof of the Quran, Allah has described things like stone, wood, things that people turn into deities and worship. He said, أَمْوَاتٌ غَيْرُ أَحْيَاءٍ. So Allah negated that they are dead, not living. Right? So therefore, your argument here is not true. It is not true. Because Allah has affirmed the absence of life for these types of things which are worshipped besides Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, when they are, like wood and stone and statues and things like that. So, likewise also we know, as the Shaykh says, وَأَخْبَرَ أَنَّ الْأَرْض يَوْمُ الْقِيَامَةِ تُحَدِّثُ أَخْبَارَهَا. The earth will give its reports on the Day of Judgment. So Allah has affirmed for the earth that the earth, تُحَدِّثُ أَخْبَارَهَا, will actually will speak in the way that Allah will make it speak and give its news. And the Shaykh says, وَهِيَ مَا عُمِلَ عَلَيْهَا مِنْ خَيْرٍ وَشَرٍ, which is whatever deeds were done on the earth of evil and good. And this necessitates وَهَذَا يَسْتَلْزِمُ سَمْعُهَا لِمَا قِيلَ وَرُؤْيَتُهَا لِمَا فُعِلَ. This necessitates that the earth is hearing what is being said and is seeing what is being done upon it. Right? Obviously, in the way or form that is known to Allah Azza wa Jal, we don't know. But what this means is that, the earth being a witness to the deeds of men, the earth will, on the Day of Judgment, will recount and will narrate the deeds of men. Now, this shouldn't come surprising or strange to us. Many of these things that the kuffar and the atheists would kind of mock as being outlandish and fairy tales, now we know over time, as mankind progresses in understanding of the complexity of the ways and the means or the mechanisms none of these things should really come to be surprising, especially now in a time where there's all-pervasive surveillance. It's possible to survey you and do, know everything that you're doing. Like you could go to China and by facial recognition, you can cross the road at a place you're not supposed to cross the road, right? And literally within 3 seconds, you'll get a thing on your phone saying, okay, you've done some jaywalking, which is you're not allowed to cross the road except from the designated places. This is like a crime, a violation. And we've automatically taken, 50, 100, whatever, from your bank in real time, within seconds, right? This is already there. And it's all just from the facial recognition, right? There's no humans involved here. There's no humans involved. Obviously, in the programming there is, but everything is lifeless. It's lifeless screens, sensors, cameras, So how is this happening then, right? So if this is something that mankind can put together for the surveillance of each other, then what Allah Azza wa Jal has informed us in the Quran of so many different things, like, the angels recording our deeds, and the angels, we are being observed, and every deed, every statement is being recorded, and the earth somehow there's a imprint, and there's a record that the earth is going to recount and speak with on the Day of Judgment in terms of what deeds were done on it. None of this is unbelievable. This is perfectly plausible and believable, right? And especially, as we progress and as mankind progresses in their knowledge and understanding, and as we see them making use of technology and so on and so forth. So anyhow, coming back to the what's the point here? The point here is that when the Jahmiyyah, or the ghulat of the Falasifa and the Jahmiyyah, when they say that, well, we can say about a wall, it's not deaf, nor is it hearing, it's not living, nor is it dead, right? So therefore we are not contradicting ourselves. Our response is, no, hang on, we don't accept that. Because in the Quran, we are told that, even inanimate things can be said to be dead, which can be potentially be brought to life. And the earth can hear, in whatever that means, whichever way that is, and observes and sees, whichever way that is, what is done upon it. Right? So we don't accept this, we believe that things can be made to speak. Even on the Day of Judgment, the skins will be made to speak. The skins will be made to speak. Right? So we don't accept this counter argument. Anyway, that's point number 2. The third response to this argument of theirs is that that the Shaykh says أن الذي يقبل الاتصاف بالكمال أكمل من الذي لا يقبله. The thing which accepts being described with attributes of perfection is more perfect than the one that does not accept being described. Let me explain what this argument is. It's as if these people are saying, imagine there's a man who is deaf and who is blind, right? He's deaf and blind. But in principle, can the man accept hearing and seeing, even though he's deaf and blind? Yes or no? Yes or no? In principle, man can accept the attributes of hearing and seeing, yes?
Yeah.
Yes? So, a blind man and a deaf man, who in principle is able to accept to have hearing and seeing, is he more perfect than a wall which, according to these people, is unable to accept the attributes in principle of hearing and seeing? Which of these two is greater in perfection? The blind man and the deaf man, yes? Because in principle he's able to hear and see, even though he can't because of an impairment, right? This kind of being is more perfect than something about which you say in principle cannot hear or see, or is not living or dead or whatever, right? So the argument here in response to those people is saying that really what you are saying about Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala that He in principle cannot accept life and death, or hearing or deafness, or knowledge and ignorance, in principle, then you have made Him to be worse than many of the creatures that in principle can accept these attributes, even though they may not have them. Right? So in other words, you've likened Allah to an inanimate thing which in principle can't accept these attributes according to you, like a wall. And you did that to flee from likening Him to that which can accept these attributes in principle. You understand? Like the point that we're making is, look at how great their misguidance is, that every time you try to flee the truth, you end up falling into something far, far worse than the thing that you tried to flee from. Right? So this is the third point. So basically what you're doing is, according to you, you are likening Allah to inanimate things. You're trying to flee tashbih and tamthil, but you're falling into tashbih and tamthil in relation to the inanimate, non-living things, which is worse, right? The fourth point, or the fourth argument, is to say that one of these two things are obviously contradictory to the other. You can't have, if non-existence is not present, then Allah has to be existing. So it has to be one or the other. You can't say we negate both, because this means Allah is the most impossible of the impossible things. Do you understand? Like, you can't say that with existence and non-existence. You can't say we deny both for Allah because we don't want to liken Him to anything. Now you've made Allah's existence to be completely imaginary and in other words, you've made Allah to be from the most impossible of things, and this is great misguidance. It is, this is actually disbelief. What they are calling to, or what they are saying. This kind of brings us to an end of this fourth group. Inshallah, what we'll do, in the next lesson we'll try to do maybe a bit of a recap, or maybe elaborate a bit more on this fourth group if need be, inshallah. But this brings us to an end of the various groups, the four groups, and from here, from this point onwards, we're going to just look at the basic essential mistakes that all of these groups have fallen into, and just bring everything together, because I know that the previous 5-6 lessons, there's a lot of heavy stuff in there. There's a lot of things to grasp. But inshallah, it's very simple. It's very straightforward. You can see that we are just repeating many of the principles that we learnt in the first part of this series. Many of these things are common sense. It's things that we know from our personal experience, and all of this sophistry, there's nothing really in it. And this is the end result of philosophy and, bringing these things into issues of creed. You end up with great misguidance, and becoming very, very confused. So inshallah, we'll stop there, and in the next lesson we'll try to do a recap of maybe this lesson, bring some other commentary, and then summarize what are the essential errors and mistakes they are falling into in all of this, inshallah ta'ala. So we'll end our lesson there for today. Walhamdulillahi Rabbil Alameen, wa sallallahu ala nabiyyina Muhammad wa ala alihi wa sahbihi ajma'in.